welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let's just take a quick look at the economic situation. In the past week, we've had foreclosures, 360,000 foreclosures, increasing under Obama. This is the biggest increase, I think, a 7% increase over the previous reporting period. It's one of the worst results in foreclosures we've ever had. Obama's program to give money to the Mozillos and the J.P. Morgan Chase bloodsuckers of the world, a failure. Time to stop foreclosures with a uniform federal law, 5 years or the duration of the crisis. Wall Street and the banks can eat the losses. That's what they owe us after we bailed them out. Food stamps, 33.4 million, I think, right now. Let's check the figures. But it's actually 34.4 million people are on food stamps, and I say they should get a better deal and not have that taken away by some free marketeer who thinks that this is corrupting their moral virtue. We got about, 12% of the U.S. population now on food stamps, 10% unemployment, we said before, real unemployment approaching 25%. Let's see, agricultural imports in the United States have fallen by 20% in the last reporting period. We have this interesting lady, the academic Elizabeth Warren, who is the TARP watchdog, who says that the worst is still ahead. We're going into apparently a double dip, according to Elizabeth Warren. She points to the fact that there's a whole series of mortgages in the commercial real estate world that will now become due in 2010, 2011, 2012, and the default rates on those commercial mortgages will be very high. They will be 50, 60% default rates on those commercial mortgages. Now, that's something like that is what happened in the years after the crash of 87. It went from the crash of 87 to a real estate crisis. That became a banking crisis, so that by 1991, Citibank was already bankrupt then and was secretly seized by federal regulators. The U.S. federal deficit now $1.8 trillion for the fiscal year that ends at the end of September. This is 4 times the figures under Mad Dog Bush the younger. On the hyperinflation, inflation, deflation front, still cross currents in my view. The most recent is now that no big change in the consumer price index. If you take out the energy part, it's up by 0.6%, I think. The energy prices have fallen by 28% over the last year as that bubble has come down, as the hedge funds went into liquidation mode. Industrial production, although there's a slight uptick this time around, 0.5% increase. The current rate of use of the current output of mines, factories, and utilities is down approximately down 13% from last year. So down 13% year over year on the industrial production side. Capacity utilization of mines, factories, and utilities is about 2/3. It's 68.5%. Normal would be 80%. So this remains depressed. Mainly the activity of utilities also declined by 2.4%. This is the first time in 9 months that industrial production has ticked up, but it's not a lot. So we don't see hyperinflation yet in these numbers, but we see it, I think, building in certain overseas stock markets and other specific categories. Anyway, still cross currents, because the cross currents of derivatives liquidation and so forth still go on. Elizabeth Warren points out that most derivatives are still there. Most of the toxic paper that Paulson and Bush started talking about in September of 2008, still there, has not been unwound, still waiting because the banks, of course, have been allowed to go to mark-to-model rather than mark-to-market. They therefore have no incentive to sell because if they sell, if they've got it mark-to-model and they take it to the market, it's worth nothing. They take a big loss. So therefore, they're hoarding their derivatives. The derivatives are still there. The idea that the financial aggregates have turned down may not be true, according to Elizabeth Warren, the watchdog of the top. She also says that Geithner is putting $2 bets all over the table. And now we've got also these characters, Rubini and Nassim, the Black Swan, coming on television. Rubini says that the recession is over. He has joined Newsweek magazine. The Black Swan says you've got to convert debt into equity, meaning derivatives into equity. Not a good idea, dear Black Swan. So let's also remember now, we want to keep our historical series going here, the Weimarization of politics and culture. Remember in Weimar, you had the monarchy. You had the monarchy of the House of Hohenzollern, that is to say, Kaiser Wilhelm, the Emperor William II of Germany, had led Germany into the insane adventure of World War I. Of course, he had been manipulated by the British, above all by his evil uncle, King Edward VII of Great Britain. But he led them in. He didn't stay out, which he could have done. He could have restrained the Austrians and kept out of it, but he didn't. And therefore, he was forced to abdicate in November of 1918. Then came the new regime, the Weimar Republic, which lasted until Hitler in 1933. And this is indeed the distant mirror for the kinds of things that we see going around ourselves today. If you want to do some summer reading, get yourself Thomas Mann. There's a novel called Disorder and Early Sorrow, the life of a middle-class family in the great hyperinflation. His brother, Heinrich Mann, has a shorter story called Cobes, C-O-B-E-S. You can find these in anthologies of short stories by Thomas Mann, Heinrich Mann. Certain libraries may still have this. There are also novels. There's Hans Fallada. People know him. He wrote the famous What Now, Little Man. But the Fallada novel that deals with the hyperinflation is called Wolf Among Wolves, The Wolf Among Wolves. And you remember All Quiet on the Western Front? Well, Erich Maria Remarque, who had written that one about the First World War, has another one called The Black Obelisk. I think it's translated into English. So what you find in this is the following. The Weimar Republic started with this huge inflation. As the Republic comes into existence in 1919, 1920, and the inflation is already going, and it goes like 20, 21, then in 22 it really takes off, and in 23 it reaches this unbelievable level, 1 trillion to 1 on the hyperinflation side. Now, that meant that the Weimar Republic had enemies. The parties that really accepted the Weimar Republic were the Social Democrats, the German People's Party, and the Catholic Center Party. But there were others to the right. The Deutschnationale Volkspartei, the German National People's Party, was essentially anti-Weimar Republic, and there was an anti-government party. Maybe like the Republicans today. At least they talked about being the anti-government party. If they had seized power, it would have looked different, as with the Republicans today. But you wonder, the bitterness against government and how this is expressed. Well, in the Weimar Republic, if you were bitter against the Weimar Republic, you were going to then be two things. You were going to be a monarchist. You were going to say, kick out these democratic so-called politicians and go back to the monarchy of the Hohenzollerns, right, the imperial, the German Empire as it had existed before 1918, or you could become a neocon, because this is where Carl Schmitt comes around. And Carl Schmitt says, we don't need the Kaiser. We don't want the emperor to come back. We want a dictator. We want a nice, modern